Hey, everybody, welcome back to another show of the Fantasy Football Consistency Show, Week 2 review, Week 3 preview. And if you noticed, there's a much better guy sitting to my right than Ron Rigney. Ron probably didn't hear that. But Ron couldn't make it this week. Got some dad things to do, which I get, totally understand it. But we have brought in, folks, the man, the legend, the man who everybody knows him as basically Carrie's husband. His name is Nate Marcum. So, Nate, welcome to the show. Glad to have you, brother. Always great hanging out with you at the Expo this year. Great time. You and your wife are just like, I could hang out all day with you guys. You guys are so much fun. But thank you for joining the show tonight. We're in the Kings Classic Blanded division together. Mm-hmm. We both kind of have similar records. We're 2-0 and 1-1 in the other, but still been an interesting start. So, welcome aboard. How's things going outside of the Kings Classic, since we've already had that conversation?
It's been a productive year. I will say I've been fortunate that I think I took a running back heavy approach as far as the overall arching theme, not by design necessarily,
right?
Sometimes situation, and I did the old lot of eggs in one basket where if they broke, I was going to be doomed. And so far they haven't all broke. It's the way the trending of the season's going. Everything's a little fragile, if you will. Yeah. But other than us, I think all having that month and a half now of dark days after the Expo. It's always a depressing time. It's really nice to be on, and we can pretend that we're sitting out on the patio at the DoubleTree and we're just chatting like we normally would, except this is actually more about football tonight than I think any of us ever talk at the Expo about, which is crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people think, oh, these guys must talk about football 24/7. Yeah, you'd be surprised. Yeah. After a while, you're kind of like, what more do we got to talk about? Unless we're arguing about players or something like that. Yeah. More often not, we're just laughing at Nate's wife, usually saying something completely off the wall. They're like, we can't even imagine. But that's why we love her. But yeah, so as you mentioned, things are breaking everywhere. And if they're not broken, we're walking on the eggshells that have broken from Humpty Dumptys that have all fallen off the wall. And we're not sure what the heck to do. Are we grabbing Carson Steele? Are we getting Kareem Hunt? Are we going to think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is coming back? Samaje Perine? It's just like your head's exploding. We're just starting week 3, man. Like you said, so far, knock on whatever wood I can find, that my teams are basically healthy in Kings Classic. But that's the scary part. It's like, gosh, that means no, I take that back. So I had Cooper Kupp. That hurts.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's funny. The league that I'm 2-0 in, not by design, because I think was my auction league. I grabbed Brian Robinson and J.K. Dobbins late for, $5 to $12. Now, I was in addition to getting Kamara and Derrick Henry. So, that team is crushing it because I got 4 running backs that are crushing it. Will that keep going? Can J.K. Dobbins stay healthy for the entire year? That's a, miracle in itself. But, so far so good. He's looking really good out there. And like you said, we can only hope. But we're here to talk about consistency, which we're still off to not a very good start. We'll start with the quarterback position. First off, for those who listen to the show, we've talked all summer about how last season was the lowest in history of me tracking the consistency model for quarterbacks clutch factor, which was under 19 points. I just shared with Nate, just 2020, the clutch factor that year was 21.8. This year, right now after week 2, it's 17.8. And yet, even as low as that number is, we only have 5 quarterbacks who are perfect after the first 2 weeks. Now, normally that last, we'll get to week 6 or 7 before we start really weeding down to the perfects will fall off. That in itself is bad. In addition to that, to make matters worse, 3 out of those 5 were not drafted as anyone's starter. In fact, a couple of them might have been on the waiver wire. I know in Kings Classic, I picked up Derek Carr last week after that game, after his week 1 game, because I had Stafford or Burrow or whatever. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe Burrow's hurt more than I think. So I grabbed Carr, luckily, last week. Now, I didn't start him because, again, why would you start him over? But here we are. Derek Carr is right there at, 2 for 2. But we have Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Derek Carr, and Geno Smith are our 5 perfect 1 or 2 for 2s. Now, Jordan Love is 1 for 1 because he didn't play week 2, but we'll just throw him out for now. Nate, what's going on? What is happening in the NFL? Is this like Stranger Things? We've flipped upside down and now we're in the end of the world, and Derek Carr, Baker Mayfield, and Geno Smith are going to lead our teams to fantasy goodness. What is happening right now in the NFL from your perspective?
I mean, the easy thing to point out is that more teams are wanting to operate out of that too high safety, that shell coverage, because it's been effective to reduce the big plays. And I think defensive coordinators and teams alike are just confident and comfortable with letting teams dink and dunk and nickel and dime and work their way down the field and hope for a pass rush that's effective, a turnover, or just a stymie on the offensive side of the ball. And for us, it's boring as hell. No one wants to watch the, 5 yards.
As long as our fantasy teams win, it's never boring.
That's
if they only
true.
win
Yes.
by, 65 to 68 or 68, 65, okay, it's still a win. You're right. It's still boring. We're supposed to be in the 150 range, right?
I'll say more stressful, because when you're going into Bob, it's crazy, man. I've seen it 2 weeks already. 2 weeks in, I've watched weeks where people I know have gone into Monday night games and they're like, oh, I'm down by 20. I've got so-and-so quarterback. And for the last decade, 20 years, let's be honest, you and I, that was a win. You went in, you were comfortable. You were already celebrating a little bit because 20 points was easy. And now, like you said, that's not a guarantee within even the QB1s, let alone if you start getting into the streaming situations.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've got people like Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, Aaron Rodgers. Patrick Mahomes is 1 for 2. He's got 35 points in 2 games. I mean, that's 17.5 points a game. That's not Patrick Mahomes. And this is the year that a lot of us, I did a few leagues. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh, well, look, he's got Worthy. He's going to have Hollywood Brown, and he's got Kelsey already. And oh my gosh, this offense is going to just explode.
Right.
And we got back-to-back weeks of 17, 18 points for this guy. No, this is not how this is supposed to work. Kyler Murray's 1 for 2, but he's looked pretty good doing it. I'll give him that. He's 5th in total points. Mm-hmm. Like I said, the biggest surprise obviously is I think it's got to be Derek Carr, New Orleans Saints. I mean, they put up back-to-back 40-point weeks. It was like, okay, it was Carolina. All right.
Right.
But they're playing Dallas this week in Dallas. Yeah. Nope. 44 points against it shut them down. It wasn't even close.
I had him as
hey.
It's like I wanted to fade. I said fade Derek Carr that week just because I thought it was, and that's the dilemma that I face with Derek Carr if I have him. And I know that just in general, so many times we want to just go, I don't believe it. And then if you actually say, you know what, now's the time. Now, luckily we're in a 14-team league. It's a little more, hey, you're going to start him. But for people in 10-team leagues, it could happen where you finally wait and you go, you know what? Patrick Mahomes just isn't getting it done. I don't like this matchup. I'm going to go with, woe is me, Derek Carr. And you start him after 2 spectacular weeks and he fails in 1 week. You're going to be gun shy. You'll never want to start him again. Right. But in reality, it's just as likely that he returns to that form that he's been shown for the first 2 weeks, because Clint Kubiak is doing the one thing is he's taking advantage and he's scheming around the defensive sets that they've been using. Yeah. He's done wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, I had heard good things about the run game being so much better for Alvin Kamara, and that's why I did draft Alvin Kamara.
Yep.
And so, good for me. But never once did I hear anybody say, "Oh, and by the way, this will also help Derek Carr
Right.
be even more productive." And the amazing part is he's been that productive with Chris Olave not doing anything.
Exactly.
It's Rashid Shaheed. It's Kamara out of the backfield. It's, and we're like, okay, what happens when Olave kicks in? Like, this could be just crazy. So, again, it's week 2, and, overreactions are overreactions, but there's certainly a lot of concern at the quarterback position. The rookies had their 1 week and then both came crashing back to reality. Richardson, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Bryce Young has been replaced already. He's just one lost puppy out there. So maybe Andy Dalton, maybe the Red Rocket, can bring some life to Deontay Johnson for all of you who took Deontay Johnson. Yeah. Anybody else? I sent you over that, the O's and twos, Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, Rodgers. I mean, I'm not saying we expected these guys to set the world on fire, but Lawrence had a really good preseason. Goff had a great second half last year. Yeah. But, what is happening? Is it because ETN and then the Lions backfield of Gibbs and Montgomery just look so good they don't need to throw as much? Is that what you're seeing too? That's kind of what I'm feeling.
That's exactly what I'm feeling, because I'm still confident in Goff going forward, because he has more weapons through the air. I mean, Jameson Williams is a revelation this year,
right?
And you would think that it's bound to improve. The dome games, are still there. We've talked about that ad nauseum. He hasn't performed yet in the first 2, but that's the tricky part is you have Jared Goff and you're trying to compare, the one-off weeks where you think, all right, this week is a perfect example. Arizona, that should be an absolute shootout. Right. And if he can move them up and down the field, but it's David Montgomery that punches it in, then it is. You might see another inconsistent week type, but there's the upside. And that's the thing, is I'll never give up on what the potential could be, even though it's a recipe for disaster. I still like Goff's outlook for the rest of the season more than many of the others in that same grouping.
Right. Well, and like you said, that game, who knows? It could turn into a Gibbs and Montgomery versus James Conner, and kick a bunch of field goals, and we're all like, oh,
exactly.
So we don't know. So perfect segue. Let's move to that running back position, and boom, the numbers jump right out in front of you. If you're looking at the trend report from the Big Guy Fantasy Sports website. Now we just talked about quarterbacks only having 5 perfect quarterbacks through week 2. There are 23 perfect running backs. Now, as somebody who's seen these numbers for many, many years, I will tell you that I can't remember the last time there were this many perfects, even after 2 weeks for running backs, because the game was all about the pass, right? I mean, if you weren't getting rushing touchdowns, you weren't getting enough yards, unless you're the bell cows, we certainly have seen the past of the Barclays and that kind of stuff. But wow, 23 different running backs, and they're not all bell cows. So yeah, there's Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Jones, Bijan Robinson. Okay, we expected those, but we're also seeing guys in there like J.K. Dobbins. We already talked about Jordan Mason basically filling in for, McCaffrey. Tony Pollard is a surprise to a lot of people. It is me for sure. I was kind of in on Brian Robinson, so I'm happy to see him there. And I was in on J.K. Dobbins, so that's worked out well. But, Zach Charbonnet is filled in now for a couple of weeks. Austin Eckler's in there as well at 2 for 2. Anybody in here really stand out to you as a big surprise to you for the perfects at this point? What are your thoughts on the running back position? I think we talked about it, and I think these numbers show, support our case.
Yeah, it does. The one that stands out, I guess, to me is the fact that if I knew Brian Robinson would be on this list, I wouldn't expect to see Austin Eckler or vice versa.
Right.
I didn't know if Washington, and we know that system was going to run a lot of plays. I mean, that's, the Kingsbury style. But I really wasn't in on Eckler. I still don't know if I am per se, but
Right.
the proof's in the pudding. You say it's, again, small sample size. I know that, but still, it's
Right,
better.
right.
It's better to have 2 consistent weeks than to have 0.
Well,
consistency.
Wouldn't you say probably why you see 2 of them in there is, one, Brian Robinson has really been running well, but it's also the fact that the Commanders' defense is putrid.
Correct.
And so they're playing from behind, or they're in shootouts because they can't stop anybody.
Yep.
So that's why they got to bring in Eckler whenever they get too far behind to start catching passes down the field. So he gets 5 catches for 50 yards. Boom, we got a clutch game. And that's, it doesn't seem like a lot, but as you can see, he's 28th in total points. So he's not even in total points in the top 24, but the consistency is there. And again, this is why I've always created this model, was to show people, hey, just in case you don't know, Eckler's actually been pretty good in PPR. So go trade for him before somebody watches our show. Exactly. You'd be like, oh, he's 28th. He's not even the top, here, I'll trade you, whoever, Javonte Williams for him, or Rashad White for him, or, somebody that's having a slow start that you might be able to sell off to maybe, get a combo platter with that. As we look down the list, and we kind of scroll into that 0 for 2, we've got Najee Harris, Zamir White, DeAndre Swift, Gus Edwards, which there's a lot of love, Chase Brown. Anybody in there that you're like, oh, wow, I was expecting more out of this guy through the first few weeks, could just, off to a slow start. We'll assume he'll come back, but anybody in there that you kind of go, that's kind of surprising to me that they're not, they're not earning the clutch game. They're not getting the output that you had expected from them, from that you may have drafted or not drafted. But
yeah, even though I wasn't real high on him, I assumed that just the system for Najee was going to be, productive. Just Arthur Smith. You assume, I know that Jalen Warren, but he was banged up even going into week 1. So
really, Warren, yeah.
But Najee is one that I'm surprised with. I'm a little surprised, kind of, in DeAndre Swift, just simply because I thought that offense was going to look a lot better. I think everybody thought Caleb was going to just out the chute be dynamic in that play, and it was going to be freeing up space for DeAndre Swift to do what he does best, which is, actually have explosive plays. But we haven't seen that yet. And Gus Edwards, it's been the J.K. Dobbins show. And we've seen Gus that they don't need him to punch in 2 or 3 from the goal line, because they just don't need that right now. And so those are the ones I'm most surprised. I'll say there's some names on there that I really want to lock in, just because you see where they're at in relationship to scoring. Might not be consistent because there's a person in front of them right now, and they're you need an injury. And if that happens, I think we'll see some consistency. And that's a player like Ty Chandler, who I'm extremely high on in that scenario. Same thing goes with Jalen Warren. Now that he's healthy, we're seeing him get more work, and we'll see that build in. And then you mentioned it, Chase Brown, where Zach Moss. I can't stand Zach Moss. I've said it for years. I think he's just a plotter, and it's nothing exciting.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I kind of was that way too. I was kind of in on Chase Brown, thinking Zach was just kind of out over the hill. The other one has been kind of surprising, even though they didn't give him a lot of work last week. Bucky Irving has looked good for Tampa Bay and filling in as well. The one that surprises me is being down there is Zamir White. The last 6 games last year, he was on fire for that team with basically the same offense, same quarterbacks. Well, I guess Gardner Minshew's there, but still. And man, he has just come out like a dud. And I get it, but the amazing thing is Alexander Madison is the guy that's pretty much pushing him out of the way. Madison is kind of taking the bull by the horns. You see him at 26th in total points, 50% consistent. I don't know if Zamir White just thought he had it locked and didn't really give a good effort. And Addison's just trying to steal it away from him. But yeah, I'm really surprised by Zamir White. Now, I didn't draft him much, but I still felt like, there was potential there. I usually just late in the draft was always grabbing Dobbins and Robinson. So lucky me for now.
Right.
They stay healthy. All right, let's move on to the wide receiver position. And amazingly enough, this is where we usually see 20 to 30 perfect wide receivers after the first couple weeks, and we only have 18. So definitely the first time I've ever seen more perfect running backs than wide receivers ever. But like you said, here we are. We're going back to the 1960s.
Exactly.
I think there's going to be, we're going to see the reemergence of Vince Lombardi and George Halas on the sidelines, and those kind of people out there running the ball. But yeah, and again, the guys at the top are not the people we expected. Chris Godwin's number one. I think I like Chris Godwin. I have Chris Godwin on a number of teams, but I got him as my third wide receiver. So the fact that he's in first place really excites me.
Yes.
Nico Collins is there. Again, a lot of love for him. Malik Neighbors, probably a big surprise. I mean, we knew he was going to get targeted a lot. I can't believe nobody has stopped this guy yet, but he's kicking butt. But Justin Jefferson, we expect. Jameis Williams, we already talked about a little bit, but we can talk more. Alec Pierce, Rashid Shaheed, not Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Smith, Rashid Rice, Zay Flowers, CeeDee Lamb, Brian Thomas Jr., Jerry Jeudy, and Khalil Shakir, and Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown at 1 for 1 in that room. Again, a lot of names we don't see on there, and we'll get to them as we scroll down a little farther. But of the ones that are up there, anybody really surprise you? I guess the one for me is definitely Alec Pierce. I don't think he was drafted in any league. Even in our Kings Class League, I don't think anybody drafted Alec Pierce.
No, I think you actually didn't. I think you picked him up in the auction league. I was looking at your team, and I thought, man, you have done a fantastic job of scooping up two guys off the waivers that have actually, in a 14-team league, for people that don't know, the waiver wire is barren. And and
it's not just 14 teams. It's 14 teams with 3 flex in addition to your regular starters. So finding anybody who has a heartbeat is a challenge, let alone somebody. So like I said, after that first week, I'm like, well, you might as well grab. And I bid probably a few more dollars more than everybody else. So a lot of people usually start the year. They don't want to jump at somebody for too high. And I probably may have overpaid for them. But that's okay, because if they work out and I win a title, then it's all worth it, right? But
all day long.
At
some point, Josh Downs will return. And
we
know there will Richardson support more than right now. He doesn't have to do anything other than, Alec Pierce, because he's not looking. I don't think he remembers Michael Pittman's on the team.
I was going to say, that's we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah. We scroll down to the zeros.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm really happy to see some of the names that I think that the stories that were told going in are validated. Like you said, you touched on Chris Godwin. He was a great wide receiver 3 because he's moving to the slot. His performance was going to be up. The smart drafters like yourself took advantage of his ADP and got in when you could. I think that it's just goes, remember this conversation that everybody was having. Now, granted, it's also 2 weeks in, right before the season, that what's going to happen? Everybody's scared of Justin Jefferson. He's going to end up as a wide receiver, 2 or 3. And we're going to go, what was I thinking? And I'm right there with you. Now again, it is early. I still don't believe in Sam Darnold to keep this train rolling, but he's doing it. So, I mean, I guess one of the names that stands, of course, is the bottom 2 between Jerry Jeudy and Khalil Shakir, just because you knew somebody in Buffalo was going to be the one. Right. You didn't think it was going to be I would have bet any amount you wanted that nobody would appear on a consistency wide receiver 100%. out of that receiving room because I figured it would go Keon Coleman one week, Khalil Shakir the next, Curtis Samuel the next, Dalton Kincaid, which is a different position, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
So for him to be on it twice is pretty telling.
Yeah. I think Judy caught me by surprise because one, Browns have been just pitiful offensively.
Yeah.
And I knew Cooper wasn't getting the ball much, so Judy must be getting the ball a little bit more than others. I mean, again, he's 30th in total points, but so far so good. We'll just have to see how that continues out. So let's scroll down and kind of just look for some of the big names and see where they're at. We see obviously Kupp got hurt in the second game, so it is what it is. Metcalf bounced back after a poor first week. Tyreek, see what happens there with Skylar Thomas. Or I really want him to bring Ryan Tannehill back, to be honest with
you. Yeah. Right.
We've had the 1 week wonders like Alan Lazard. It's Quentin Johnson, a 1 week wonder, Xavier Worthy, Jalen Naylor. We've seen quite a few of those guys. Darnell Mooney had a big week this past week. But the big names, Jamar Chase, DJ Moore, Drake London, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Olave, all in that 50% range. Again, I feel like if they're at least they're in the 50% range, they're 1 for 2. Yeah. Okay, I can live with that. If we get down into the 0 for 2s, we've got Ayuk, we've got Michael Pittman, which we just talked about, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Tank Dell, Deontay Johnson, 78th in total points at 8.4. Of course, Puka got hurt. Mari Cooper, 7.7 points in 2 games, 81st place. These are the guys that we sit here and start to get a little edgy about what's happening with their offenses. Now, the Browns suck. I would have drafted a Brown if you gave them to me for free at the end. So I knew that. I knew Deshaun Watson is just a complete waste of time and effort. I was, being in this area, I was certainly really paying attention to the news, kind of watching, the news at night, and you'd see the highlights or whatever, the video of them throwing in camp. And Deshaun Watson just looks like he doesn't give 2 shits about anything other than the fact he got $230 million guaranteed. He's got to go.
I know. I can't believe that Jameis isn't just not being mentioned more, like even as a threat, even as a, hey, watch your back. This is a scenario. Maybe it is. Maybe locally there is talk, but
I think it all depends on the wins and losses. I mean, this team won 11 games and made the playoffs with 5 different quarterbacks or 4 different quarterbacks last year, including Joe Flacco. They got beat by the Cowboys, which everybody's like, all right, it's the Cowboys. They're one of the best teams. And then they got their asses handed to them by the Saints. And everybody went, oh, well, maybe the Browns do suck. We barely beat a Jacksonville team that hasn't been doing very well. So I think it's all going to depend. If they lose to a team they should beat, this defense can't do this every week. You can't shut down these teams everywhere. They're good. They're very good. Mm-hmm. But at some point, this offense has to do something more than just get by with a win, because at some point they're going to get tired or they're going to get hurt, and you're going to lose somebody back there, whether it's a lineman or defensive back, and they're going to start losing to teams they shouldn't lose to. I think that's when you've got to make the switch. I hope he just pulls a hamstring and decides to sit out the year and we be done with it like he did last year, but whatever.
Exactly.
But anyway, Nate, looking at these 0 for 2s, is there anybody in there that you're more concerned than normal about at this point with what you've seen with these these good wide receivers that are not doing good from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, the name that stands out to me the most, just because I think that I have him on more of my team, so I see his name and I see the 5 points per game, as Terry McLaurin, which, a lot of people that know that offense and that system, I heard warnings. I didn't believe it that they weren't going to incorporate motion and move people around, but it sounds like he just sits out on the side and they say run your route and we'll try to get you the ball. And if that's the case with Jaden Daniels, if I'd thought more about it, and shame on me for not, that would have been an avoid in that scenario. The other name that really I thought was, I drafted him in Kings Classic. Again, it was for the intent of being a floor. I'm happy to have one volatile wide receiver that can boom or bust. If I would have went Malik Neighbors in my eyes, that's, could be either or.
Right.
Give me another high ceiling play, then I'll take my floor. And that was Christian Kirk. And he has no floor right now. And it is, and I don't see any sign, especially with Brian Thomas Jr. continuing as he continues to, excel. The idea that Christian Kirk is just going to get fed eventually starts to go to the wayside. And it's hard to replace a person that you expect to be your wide receiver 3 when you have 3 other flex spots that all aren't getting enough attention. You're hoping for 7 to 8 points out of 2 of those spots. And if you're getting 4 points out of your wide receiver 3 spot, yes. Is there room to turn around? Sure. We know that Trevor can potentially support 2 different wide receivers in that offense, and no Evan Ingram right now, again, potentially this week. So maybe fingers crossed that this is a Christian Kirk week and you and I can breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah, no, I mean, the reason I drafted Kirk was just 2 years ago when they didn't have Calvin Ridley and Kirk was the number 1 receiver. He was 12th in total points that year. He was top 12 in that, top 24 in consistency. And I'm like, wide receiver 3 all day long, right? And I was watching the Browns game. I'm like, do you realize that Christian Kirk even exists? I get it. Browns again, good pass defense, keep them edgy. But my thought is, well, isn't Christian Kirk the short guy? Isn't he the quick hits and the quick slants? And
exactly,
why aren't you throwing it? And you don't even have Evan Ingram, so why are you not throwing to him? So, but yeah, that was bad. I think that we had talked about earlier surprised me the most, and I drafted him on a number of teams too, because I thought Richardson was going to be is Michael Pittman. I was like, oh yeah, and he was sliding in most drafts. You could get him as your wide receiver too, which I was perfectly fine with. And 12.2 points. He's basically 0.3 ahead of McLaurin. So. The fact that he's only 0.3 ahead of Darius Slayton may be the more depressing statement than that.
It is. What's crazy is that so many of my teams, and maybe your teams as well, that started off with all these running backs that are actually doing well, the Alvin Kamara's of the world that I was fortunate to have a lot of. And, then I wait and I'm thinking, all right, I'll grab one solid receiver and then get these bottom 2. Unfortunately, all the quote unquote values that I found, I was like, wow, McLaurin is my 2 outside of Rashee Rice, which I found to get him late and it was a steal. And it is what it is, but one off by comparison. Unfortunately, right in that same grouping that you just rattled off all those names, it's Michael Pittman, Terry McLaurin, even Cortland Sutton, and Tank Dell went higher than, but Deontay Johnson. We just assumed, PPR guys, they'll get their points. They'll be consistent is what I thought. Yeah. Clearly, that's not the case. Like, that's the only thing I was thinking.
Right. We can only hope Andy Dalton brings that back. That's what I'm definitely.
Exactly.
Last and always least is our favorite position. Ron and I used to always say, well, it's time to get to the tight ends and we don't want to go there. But, last year wasn't too bad. We were starting to compare quarterbacks and tight ends. We felt that was a little bit too rude to the quarterbacks. But we've got 3 tight ends who are perfect 2 for 2. We've got 4 of them that are 1 for 1. Couple of just because they filled in for a injured player like Luke Schoonmaker and those kind of folks, and Brenton Strange for Jacksonville. But Brock Bowers is number 1, which we all expected.
Sure.
Maybe his mom, maybe his brother. I don't know. First in total points, 2 for 2. Kittle's 2 for 2. Trey McBride's 2 for 2. Those 2 we expected to be up there, certainly for sure. Like I said, the 1 for 1s, Foster Moreau, Schoonmaker, Brenton Strange, Njoku his first week, Isaiah Likely his first week. And after that, it's 50%. And there's only about 10 of those. And then there's a lot of 0 for 2s, folks. And if you're one of those people out there with, Dallas Goedert, Dalton Kincaid, Dalton Schultz, Travis Kelce, you're 0 for 2, and you're not happy about it, especially the Kelce owners for sure. It's just a mess in the tight end position. Hunter Henry had a great week last week. Kyle Pitts has been up and down. It's maybe the biggest mess I've seen in tight ends. And I know it's only 2 weeks, but this is just a disaster at this point. Like, what is going on with Sam Laporte in Detroit? Why is Kelce not seeing the ball? Are teams really double teaming him and keeping him away? Or is he just, I'm going to get married to Taylor Swift and it is what it is? I don't know. Do you have any notes of wisdom for everyone out there? Because I have no idea what to tell somebody right now. And they're like, why is the tight end's position a mess? I'm like, I don't know.
To be honest, I don't. I'm the most surprised just because I thought this was the year where the top, there wasn't that one. It wasn't just Kelce and then the rest. It was Kelce, Laporta, Andrews, Pitts, however you want to coordinate it.
Whatever order you wanted. McBride, Njoku, like you said, Mark Andrews, Goddard, Kincaid, Schultz,
Kittle.
There's 8 to 10. Yeah. Like, there was depth last year that we all went, okay, I don't have to. Oh, we forgot Evan Ingram. Yeah. There was so much depth, and I drafted Evan Ingram and Njoku and Pitts, probably one of those 3 on almost every one of my teams.
I'm so overweight on Dalton Kincaid and I'm like somewhat pleasantly surprised that I was so high on him that someone else luckily was just as high, if not higher, in most of the leagues where when they took him at the end of the 4th, early 5th, right before, I was MFing him. And I had to wait, and I ended up getting someone like Kittle, which after the news today is not as great either because he's now going to probably miss.
Is he hurt now?
Yeah, he hurt his hamstring, so he's didn't practice today. He's not looking good for this weekend.
Oh my gosh!
Exactly, the hits keep coming. So now next week, when you look at it, granted, perfect is still perfect if you don't play, but will there be? There will only be 2 if Bowers and McBride both have another consistent week that. They went 3 for 3, and I didn't know that's where we were going to be at week 3 in the season.
Yeah, the consistency of tight ends is always poor. And we get that. Like I said, the depth after last year, we thought, okay, you can still get a decent tight end. Is you tight end 8, which you're getting in round 6 or 7 was either Njoku, maybe Pitt sometimes, or Kittle. Or Ingram too is always. So like I said, one of those guys fell. I never reached for Kelce, never reached for Laporta. No, I take that back. I was in the Independence Bowl, which is the July 4th one on Sirius XM, and it's a 2 tight end starting.
Okay.
So guess what? I drafted Laporta and Kincaid. Oh. Guess what? My team's 0-2. I thought I was going to crush this entire league. My team is 0 for 2 because my quarterback is Mahomes. I was just like,
I'll tell you.
When I got done drafting, I was like,
I'm intrigued to see how, that FFPC leagues that are tight end premium.
Oh, right.
I'd like to look at some of those. The guys that, the people that spent, I drafted in Vegas this year, just a couple weeks ago, not in the FFPC format, but in the NFFC one. And I talked to a lot of the PFFC people. And I get the feeling that at this point right now, I'm sure that it's just misery loves company because everybody's got a bad team if you drafted tight ends in the first round because of the tight end premium. Right. But there's probably a little bit of panic, or there's a lot of value out there because people that didn't take the tight ends early that like we said, waited and made a Pat Fryermuth and Hunter Henry is there too.
Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki or Likely or somebody.
But it's week 2, or 3. So yeah.
Again, no, we're not saying it's the end of this, but But this is a good time to pivot. So, if you got somebody who's got a Kelsey or a Laporta or somebody like that, and you hear them whine, jump on them.
Yep, agreed.
And especially if you got somebody like, Isaiah Likely or Hunter Henry or Gesicki just had good weeks, send it, do it, because they'll bounce back. It will happen, And sometimes you catch them. You can catch them off guard like that, Sometimes be like, oh, wait a minute, no, I'm not that, Just don't make it a desperate thing. Don't make it stupid. Don't make it like I'm going to give you, Luke Schoonmaker for Kelsey straight up.
Yeah.
But, give them something that can help their team, but you're going to get Kelsey and you're going to give them one of the tight ends that are off to a decent start, or at least whatever, one game start, and catch them off guard. You never know. I've done it before. I've also went the other way and got my ass burned. So it happens.
That is true. That's part of the risk. I would happily, if they need depending upon the position of need, of course, but
right.
I have no problem moving someone, maybe is now the time to try to sell high for J.K. Dobbins and get someone like Kelsey and something back. We don't need to sit here and go through all the what if trade scenarios, but you're right. I do agree. And I think that you hit the one area for sure. I do believe Kelsey is going to bounce back. Number one, without Pacheco, I have to believe the team's going to throw 10 to 15% more than what they have throughout the first two. And those targets should hopefully start finding their way to Kelsey, because he's going to have to lean on some comfortable level. And if not, hey, you know what? We had a good run with Trav. Let's hope that's not.
Right. I forgot you're a Chiefs fan. Yes.
Oh yeah.
No, and he's gonna be fine. It's early. Whether it's just the way the scenario, schemes work differently. Like you said, look at Isaiah Likely, right? First week against Kansas City, this guy lights up the world for 120 yards, and the next week he has, what do you have this past week? 6 points, maybe 9 points, maybe. Those kind of things. That's what this consistency is all about. Is can they do that week after week? And usually. And I tracked this last year. I'm going to track it again this year. I tracked the 1 week wonders and how well they do after their big week. And I think last year, I think the consistency percentage after I think the basic thing was they had to place in the top 10 of their position that 1 week. And then, and if they got injured, then it didn't count as a game against them. But I think I want to say it was under 33% after a big game. Like the only two players last year who had a big game and stayed consistent was CJ Stroud and who was a rookie wide receiver?
Oh, who would have?
Rashee Rice.
Oh, there you go. Okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Rice was the other one. Because we didn't expect that much out of him. But those two made up most of the consistency percentage number. But most of them were 1, 2, maybe after the fact. So again, be careful. Things happen. So don't. You always hear don't chase last week, which it's hard not to do, especially if you're in a very shallow league like we are with Kings Classic. You're kind of like, I got to put him in there because if I don't, and then he goes off again, then I'm really stupid, right? Exactly. Why did I even pick the guy up if I don't put him in? Which I did with Derek Carr, which is really stupid. But anyway,
it's normal. It's the
it's the way it is. So, all right. Well, Nate, thank you so much for joining in. Tell everybody where they can find your work on a very consistent basis.
Sure, I am consistently on Fantasy and Frames with Jorge and the guys. Wednesday night, we have our Fourth and Frames podcast that airs at 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central. And then Sunday morning, over on our YouTube channel, as well as Facebook, everything else, Twitter, X, whatever, we do a fantasy pregame show where I host it's a 3-hour from 8 a.m. Central till 11 a.m. Central or 9 a.m. Eastern, whatever. I think we know time zones. But yeah, and that is both offense, and that even dives a little bit into the IDP side for the people that have some of that some shallower approaches, but a little bit of both. It's a good rundown of mostly just game concept as well. So it kind of says, hey, what can we expect outside of just the total fantasy points as a whole? So it's a good time.
It's fun when I play in one league, and I want to say this is Iggy's league, Iggy Gilbert. And it's the whatever FF7 country, or I don't know what it is, but
yes.
Anyway, there's like, I don't know, 6 or 8 IDP spots in it. And I'm like leading the league, and my team's leading the league in scoring with over 530 points. And I think second place is like 450. Why am I that far ahead? Has nothing to do with my offense. I have Aiden Hutchinson. I have Fred Warner. Right? That's the linebacker for the 49ers, right?
For the 49ers, yeah.
Yeah. Those 2 guys last week that by themselves scored 75 points.
Oh, yeah. Aiden Hutchinson
Hutchinson had, 5 sacks, and Warner, I think Hutchinson had 45, and I think Warner had 25 or 30. And my team scored like almost 300 points. And everybody's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I knew those 2 players, so I drafted them. That was literally what, like, oh, I know who they are. Like that was it. I was just like, sure, because at that point it was just like, I might as well get some of these guys, and I know who that guy is, and I knew who that guy is, But yeah, so far it's kind of lucky, but we'll take it.
Hey, I'll take luck over skill for the percentage that I don't prepare for.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I'm sure everybody will like, well, of course you would pick Aiden Hutchinson and Fred Warner. I'm like, yeah, I guess, but I could have also waited and not even thought twice about it, but so far it's working out for me, but we'll see. Absolutely. So anyway, Nate, thank you again for being on the show. Appreciate having you. Always find me, of course, Bob_Lung on Twitter, Big Guy Fantasy Sports, all the great stuff this week. Of course, tonight's podcast, but don't forget, Prop It Like It's Hot, Saturday, prop bets, Colby, Conway, and I, Ron Rigney and Colby will be doing the consistently cashing DFS. They have cashed 2 weeks in a row. They are on fire. So make sure you check them out as well. And of course, check out all the great articles on the Big Guy Fantasy Sports website. So for Nate Marcum, I'm Bob Lung. Take care. God bless. We'll see you soon.